we are going to learn two-way data binding in Angular. So two-way data binding always happens between the Angular components class and its view. It means whenever we have some data within the class of my component, I have to be binding it with the template or the view by calling a data binding. So data binding is nothing but a binding of the data from the class to the view in an Angular component. This is actually a one-way binding, and the other way of binding is to communicate the data or an event from the view to the class component and its variable. So here the model and the view plays a prominent role in exchange of data or events between the class and the view. So let us see how we will be implementing the two-way data binding in Angular. So in two-way data binding, what happens is like this. An Angular component will be having initially some data within it. For example, I say I have a variable called as const name is equal to John. So here name is the model and the initial value given to the name is John. So I can display the same name on my template by using the mustache braces or the double curly braces, and I can access the value of name on my template. So in order to achieve this, we are using the data binding. So the data from the component class is being displayed on the template of the component. So this is a one-way binding. And later on, I want to display, I can have another input box on my template, so which will be accepting any input from the user. So once the user enters an input, that should be actually updating the name over here by overwriting the value of John. So this case is nothing but a sequence of event binding from the template to the class component. So how this happens within the Angular component, it's quite interesting. So let us do that with a small example. So I'm opening my Visual Studio Code and I'm just creating a project called as ng new two-way binding. That's the name of my folder. So depending upon the speed of your machine, this may take some time. So initially this Angular version will be prompting me whether to enable routing or not, and I want to enable routing for the future sessions. So I'm saying Y and I hit enter, and in this case I want to use the CSS style of styling, CSS format of styling to my components. So I'll be selecting the CSS part and it will be starting to create the application directory structure. So ng client is such a wonderful tool which does all this for us. So during this process, so I want to just mention few things about Angular and its data. So Angular's data, so we frequently call, because Angular is MEC based framework for the UI and UX. This always accepts the models as the initial data. We can refer to all the data of a component as the model. So this model can be used either to generate a further sets of data, or to update the values from the form or any other user inputs and send it back to the API which you have in the backend. So model is always important, and the coordination between the model and the template is often necessary for us to show exactly the data what we want to show. So the exchange of the data between the template and classes requires some other stuff also. For example, we should be familiar with the string interpolation, the template strings, which we have already discussed in the previous Angular Foundation session. So this is taking a bit of time to set up a new project for me, but generally what we can do is we can have a common project set up for learning Angular, and this same project can be used to practice and to work out some examples and assignments. So this will be a common reference project for us to learn Angular. So the ng client is done with building the project, and if I just go to my directory structure and expand it, I can see my project is already set up there. So to test or to load the project on my browser, I'll be using ngserve, and optionally I can also set any port number here, but initially I don't want to specify any other port, so I just say ngserve. So make sure you have to be within the directory of the project. So let me cd into the recordings. Let me cd into the project name. The project name is two-way binding. So within this directory, now I'm saying ngserve, which will put up my application on the browser.
It's 22 hours.
So after compiling, we get this default page for default Angular application. So let me go and remove everything from this page. So I can go into my src folder, and within that I can find my app folder, which contains all the components for my application within the HTML. Now I'm going to remove everything which is there. I say Ctrl A and delete everything, and upon saving, the code gets compiled again. And let us go back to the browser and see it refreshes, and nothing is left here to display. So now let us look into an example where the component is having the value called as name, and this name is initially taking two-way data binding as its value. So how can I show up this name on my template? Yes, I can use the string interpolation here, saying name is whatever the name is there in my class component initially, the same I want to print it here. So let us go back and check in the application. You can see the name is two-way binding. But in this case, we have the component here, and the component's model is having some value, and the same value I am printing on the template. It means I am using a data binding to pass on or to communicate the model to the template. Suppose I have an input box which has some initial type as text, and whatever I enter into the text has to be updated, has to be updating the name value or the model on my component. How can I do that? So for here comes the role of ng model. So ng model is the one which binds the input field back to the model on the component. So this ng model has a special type of syntax. So initially this ng module has to be enclosed within a square bracket, which is the meaning for data binding in Angular, and after that it has to be enclosed within a parenthesis, which is for event binding in Angular. So now I can just set this value to whatever the model I am referring in my component. It is going to be the name. So you have to make sure, in order to use the ng model in your application, your app module should have the forms module already imported, because this forms module contains all the classes and the library. This is a big library which contains all the essential directives necessary for manipulating or working with the forms in Angular. And of course this is going to be a data driven form, and we are going to learn about the reactive forms or the model driven forms in the next sessions. And now this is very important to be loaded within the app module to enable the two-way data binding in the application, and without this the Angular will not understand what this ng model is. So now let us save this and go back to the application, and you can see here there is one input box which is created, and already there is one value auto filled in that, because my Angular ng model is allowing this input box to communicate in the both ways. So in the first case, it is reading the value from the class or the component by using the data binding, and the second time now I can change the value on my template, so we can see the same will be updated here as well. So now I am just removing it, and you can see everything is gone here, and here I am typing John, and the same thing is getting reflected here. So like this, I can achieve a two-way data binding simultaneously, which will actually display the value from the model and also use the event binding to update it back to the model from the template. And using the same application, using the same concept of two-way data binding, you can actually try to implement a simple addition maker by accepting two numbers from the two input fields and displaying the sum just below it. You can take it as a simple task to make sure that you got the concept of two-way data binding in Angular thoroughly. And this is for this session, and we are going to meet with some other interesting topic in the next session. Hope you all enjoyed this learning. Thank you so much. Have a nice day.